has shaken both Westminster and Buckingham Palace to their core. Just moments ago, the contents of Prince William's 12-page constitutional memorandum were leaked to the press. Yes, the memo that senior figures in Number 10 reportedly tried and failed to suppress has now entered the public domain. The implications are seismic. The royal household is once again in turmoil, while Downing Street is scrambling to contain what can only be described as a constitutional crisis. What we are witnessing tonight is the most significant royal intervention in British politics in over a century. And make no mistake, this is not a minor disagreement over policy. This is a direct and unprecedented challenge to Prime Minister Keir Starmer's government. The 5 constitutional charges contained within this document don't merely question his authority. They expose what some are calling a reckless disregard for the very foundations of the British state. According to multiple independent sources, one within Westminster and 2 with close ties to Kensington Palace, the memo was leaked to a senior BBC constitutional editor at approximately 4:30 p.m. this afternoon. What followed was chaos. Inside Number 10, aides were reportedly rushing between offices as crisis meetings were convened at the highest levels. Prince William, sources say, was informed of the leak during a private charity engagement. Witnesses describe him as composed yet resolute. One aide reportedly quoted the prince as saying, "The constitutional principles at stake are more important than palace protocols. The British people have a right to know." This isn't a mere letter of concern. It's a meticulously written, legally grounded critique, a full-scale dismantling of the government's constitutional agenda. Portions of the memo obtained by this network show it is divided into 7 sections, culminating in 5 detailed and, according to insiders, unanswerable constitutional indictments. When the document was first hand-delivered to Number 10 2 days ago by a senior royal aide, panic set in almost immediately. Prime Minister Starmer convened his closest advisors for an emergency 90-minute meeting, described by one attendee as electric. The initial reaction, we're told, was not discussion, but suppression. Within hours, government lawyers were exploring legal mechanisms to block media coverage of the memo's contents, even considering the use of national security provisions to justify a D-notice, effectively a press blackout. In other words, the first instinct of the government in response to a constitutional challenge from the heir to the throne was censorship. But it didn't stop there. A senior Whitehall official has revealed that a directive was issued from the Cabinet Office, labeling the memo a sensitive internal document and warning civil servants that discussing its contents would constitute a breach of the Official Secrets Act. This was more than damage control. It was a threat, an attempt to enforce silence through fear. Why such panic? Because, as one source told us, the memo isn't a complaint, it's an indictment. It dissects the government's legislative plans line by line, exposing flaws so fundamental that senior legal advisors inside Number 10 are said to be stunned. One official reportedly remarked, "We catastrophically underestimated him. We thought he was ceremonial. He's a constitutional heavyweight." And that's where the real political danger lies. Not just in the leak itself, but in what it reveals. A future king directly accusing an elected government of breaching constitutional law. Now we turn to the first and most devastating revelation within that memo. A charge so grave it calls into question the very legality of the Starmer government's legislative agenda. On page 3, Prince William accuses the Prime Minister of what he terms the unlawful usurpation of royal prerogative. In plain terms, he argues that the government has sought to strip away centuries-old powers of the Crown through ordinary legislation, powers that underpin the constitutional balance between monarchy and parliament. These prerogatives, the appointment of ministers, the granting of royal assent and other ceremonial authorizations, are not symbolic gestures, William insists. They are safeguards designed to prevent the concentration of power in political hands. By attempting to alter them without proper consultation or cross-party consent, the Prime Minister, the memo alleges, has acted ultra vires, beyond his legal authority. A palace legal source summarized it this way: "The government cannot vote itself powers that belong to the Crown. That isn't democracy. That's tyranny." It is a stunning charge. The heir to the throne has, in effect, accused the Prime Minister of attempting a constitutional coup. The memo reportedly references historical legal precedents dating back to the early 17th century, cases the government either disregarded or failed to understand. This is no longer a political dispute. It is an allegation of illegality at the very top of British government. a direct confrontation between the future king and the sitting prime minister. But don't just take my word for it. Tonight, senior constitutional experts are weighing in on the content of Prince William's leaked memorandum, and their analysis should concern every citizen in Britain. Professor Alistair Finch of Oxford University, one of the country's leading constitutional scholars and an advisor to two former prime ministers, described the document as constitutional dynamite. Speaking to the BBC just an hour ago, he explained, "What Prince William has done is move this from a political dispute to a legal confrontation. He is arguing, in effect, that the government is attempting to build a house without foundations. If this legislation were to pass, it would immediately trigger a constitutional crisis because it violates the fundamental, unwritten principles that hold this nation together." Finch went further, warning that the government's bid to use a simple parliamentary majority to alter the Crown's constitutional role represents, in his words, the most dangerous act of executive overreach since the 17th century. And yet, the legal analysis doesn't stop there. A King's Counsel, who claims to have been briefed on the full contents of the memorandum, told The Times today that William's argument regarding royal prerogative is, quote, unanswerable. "The Prime Minister seems to believe he is the head of a republic," he wrote. "He is not. He is the King's First Minister. This memorandum is not a plea. It is a formal constitutional reminder of that fact. Downing Street's legal team, sources say, has been completely outmaneuvered. With the memo now in the public eye, the government cannot simply dismiss or ignore its implications. It stands accused, by the heir to the throne himself, of breaching the very framework of Britain's unwritten constitution." The official government response, issued 2 days ago, described Prince William's intervention as inappropriate political involvement. But in light of these revelations, that response now looks shallow, even absurd. This is no longer a matter of politics. It is a matter of law. And that brings us to the second constitutional bombshell contained within Prince William's leaked memorandum, one with implications far beyond Westminster. On page 5 of the document, the prince reportedly accuses the government of showing reckless disregard for the Commonwealth. According to multiple sources who have seen the memo, William argues that the Starmer administration, in its ideological rush to diminish the monarchy, has ignored a fundamental reality. King Charles is not only the sovereign of the United Kingdom, but also the head of state for 14 other independent nations, including Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. This single point has sent shockwaves through the Foreign Office. The proposed legislation, which would strip the king of key ceremonial powers and expose his private communications, might apply within the UK, but the ramifications inevitably extend across the Commonwealth. The memo reportedly poses a devastating question. Did the Prime Minister consult the leaders of His Majesty's other realms before introducing legislation that alters the nature of the crown they all share? The answer, according to a senior Whitehall source, is no. The Starmer government never sought the counsel or consent of its Commonwealth partners. In their single-minded pursuit of domestic reform, they have, as one diplomat put it, insulted 14 sovereign allies. What we are now facing is not only a constitutional crisis, but a diplomatic one. William's memorandum argues that this legislation does more than undermine the British crown. It disregards the Commonwealth realms as if they were relics of empire. Irrelevant colonial afterthoughts, as one passage reportedly puts it. The consequences are already reverberating across the globe. Trusted sources in Canberra and Ottawa confirm that both the Australian and Canadian Prime Ministers are deeply concerned and were completely blindsided by the news. A diplomatic cable from the Australian High Commission, portions of which we have obtained, describes the Starmer government's actions as constitutionally reckless and deeply disrespectful. Let that sink in. One of Britain's closest allies now publicly accusing its government of constitutional recklessness. A senior Canadian diplomat speaking privately put it bluntly. "We share a head of state. You cannot simply change the rules of a shared monarchy without so much as a phone call. This is not how allies behave." This, analysts say, is the scale of the miscalculation that Prince William's 12-page memorandum has laid bare. He has demonstrated that this controversy isn't just about British tradition, it's about Britain's global standing, its relationships, and the stability of the Commonwealth itself. But perhaps the most revealing part of this second bombshell lies within Westminster. Inside Labour's radical backbench faction, the same group that, as we previously reported, referred to the royals as parasites in a private meeting, reaction to the chaos appears celebratory. A leaked WhatsApp message from that group, sent just 3 hours ago, allegedly reads, "If the Commonwealth realms are upset, good. It's time they grew up and became republics." That message exposes the deeper political motive behind this crisis. This isn't merely about modernization, it's about dismantling the monarchy, and by extension the Commonwealth, in one coordinated ideological strike. Prince William's memorandum has brought that agenda into the light. And now, Keir Starmer finds himself caught in the center of the storm, portrayed either as complicit in a radical plan or dangerously naive to the constitutional forces at play within his own government. And that brings us to the third constitutional bombshell, arguably the most sophisticated and legally precise element of Prince William's 12-page memorandum. On page 7, the prince levels a charge that cuts to the very heart of Britain's governance, the corruption of the civil service. This is not the voice of a man acting on impulse. This is the voice of a future king defending the integrity of the British state itself. Here's the situation. For weeks, we've reported that senior civil servants, the mandarins who quietly keep government running, have been deeply uneasy about this proposed legislation, believing it to breach constitutional convention. But William's memo takes that discomfort and transforms it into a legal and moral confrontation. According to multiple sources who've read the document, the prince argues that the Starmer government, by forcing through legislation of questionable legality, is compelling civil servants to violate their own constitutional oaths. Think about that. The British civil service does not serve the Prime Minister personally. It serves the Crown. Its entire existence is founded on impartiality and the preservation of constitutional order. William's memo reportedly accuses the government of pressuring senior officials to craft legal justifications for a policy they themselves believe to be unconstitutional. That, he argues, is a direct violation of the Civil Service Code. One insider described this section of the memo as a masterstroke, because here, William isn't simply defending the monarchy, he's defending the entire machinery of the British state. He is positioning himself as the protector of hundreds of thousands of politically neutral civil servants who are being forced to choose between their careers and their constitutional duty. In effect, the prince is giving them cover, reminding them that their loyalty lies not with the Labour Party, but with the Crown itself. It is constitutional chess of the highest order, and it has sent shockwaves through every major department in Whitehall. But what follows is even more alarming. A revelation buried deep within the annex of the memo that should concern every citizen in Britain. Prince William reportedly exposes what he calls a purge clause hidden in the draft bill, a clause that gives the Prime Minister sweeping powers to reassign or discipline senior civil servants deemed to be obstructing his legislative agenda. Let's be clear, this is a loaded weapon aimed directly at those who uphold constitutional duty. It's a legal mechanism designed to punish neutrality, to silence dissent within the state apparatus itself. Constitutional experts describe it as the very definition of executive overreach, a deliberate attempt to erode the checks and balances that have safeguarded Britain from tyranny for centuries. William, in his memo, reportedly calls the clause an affront to democratic principles and a hallmark of an illiberal state. This is no longer about royal tradition or ceremonial authority. This is about the soul of the British Constitution. The government knew its plans would be deemed unconstitutional, and rather than amend them, it attempted to legalize retaliation against anyone who stood in its way. It's this level of detail, forensic, unrelenting, and precise, that transforms a political disagreement into a full-blown constitutional crisis. And Prince William has now brought it squarely into public view. Which leads us to the fourth constitutional bombshell, and perhaps the most politically explosive of them all. On page 9, Prince William accuses the Prime Minister of public mandate deceit. In essence, the heir to the throne is charging the government with betraying the British electorate, enacting a radical constitutional overhaul that it never once sought permission to pursue. According to those familiar with the memo, William's legal team meticulously analyzed Labour's last election manifesto, dissecting every clause related to constitutional reform. And their conclusion is damning. Nowhere does that manifesto mention a plan to rewrite the constitutional role of the monarchy. William's message is clear. The government is acting without consent. It is attempting to reshape the nation's foundation under the false pretense of a public mandate. This is a devastating political strike. William is, in effect, accusing Keir Starmer of misleading the electorate, of winning on promises of moderation and stability, only to pursue a radical ideological agenda once in power. And the timing of this revelation could not be worse for the government. Labour secured office with just 34% of the popular vote, a figure William reportedly highlights as proof that the Prime Minister's claim to sweeping reform is constitutionally fragile. The memo's intent here is unmistakable: to fracture Starmer's parliamentary support from within. It targets Labour's wavering backbenchers, particularly the 12 MPs already voicing private doubts, forcing them to confront a stark question: are they loyal to their party's leadership, or to the voters who elected them? And the political impact has been immediate and catastrophic. A new YouGov poll conducted within 12 hours of the leak shows Starmer's personal approval rating collapsing by 15 points. Even more damning, 78% of respondents said they do not believe the Prime Minister has a public mandate to alter the monarchy's constitutional role. This is the nightmare scenario Labour strategists had feared: a populist backlash uniting traditionalists, moderates, and constitutionalists alike. The petition opposing the government's reforms has now exploded from 460,000 signatures just 2 days ago to over 1.2 million as of this evening, one of the fastest growing in British history. And yet, the government continues to double down, dismissing William's intervention as inappropriate involvement in political matters. That response now rings hollow, even absurd, in the face of such overwhelming public sentiment. Because this is not politics, this is constitutional duty, and the public appears to agree with the future king. Which brings us finally to the fifth and final bombshell, the most consequential revelation of all. On page 11, Prince William issues his gravest warning yet: an imminent threat to the unity of the United Kingdom. As Prince of Wales, and heir to the throne of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, William's argument is clear and deeply patriotic. He writes that the crown is not merely a symbol, but the golden thread binding the four nations together. The memo reportedly predicts that by politicizing and weakening the monarchy, the government is inadvertently fueling separatist movements in Scotland and Wales, providing them with the very justification they need to demand independence. In short, William accuses the Prime Minister of placing his party's ideological ambitions above the survival of the United Kingdom itself. This is the final checkmate, the moment the future king transforms from a constitutional observer into the defender of the Union. One senior Conservative MP who has read the memo told us just 30 minutes ago, "It's the most brilliant constitutional document I've ever seen. William has trapped him. Starmer must now choose his radical backbenchers or the United Kingdom. He cannot have both."